partnerships lead at Open Minds, and Open Minds is a British-Ukrainian tech company that specializes. Much to Nikolai and Leslie for having this conversation. I will move away from the furniture's way, and we are going to move towards the cognitive battle space and information warfare, which is and has been a huge topic in the war in Ukraine, and we have a great panel to talk about this and discuss the present and the future of this topic. So, I mean, in general, the war in Ukraine, it shows how the cognitive battle space by itself is evolving, and it is intensifying, mostly due to AI-generated disinformation, which we probably all have seen so far, and the persistent saturation, cross-platform saturation that we're seeing. So, this next panel will explore how civil society and commercial actors in Ukraine are moving beyond reactive responses to these challenges and developing innovative approaches to operate effectively in this environment. And to discuss these topics, I would like to invite to this stage Rashid Bilalov, the Strategic Partnerships Lead at Open Minds. And Open Minds is a British-Ukrainian tech company that specializes in information operations. And Rashid's work per se focuses on building partnerships across government, security institutions, and civil society. Rashid, please come on stage. Then we have Peter Pomerantsev, a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins University. He is an accomplished journalist, he is an author, he is a researcher. He has written 3 books about different aspects of current and historic propaganda, starting from propaganda in Russia and ending in Hitler Germany. In his research, Peter focuses on engaging audiences and the audiences that are particularly vulnerable to propaganda and disinformation. And to do that, he combines sociological studies, technological innovation with message testing. So after that, we have Anna Vyshnyakova, the legal consultant and director at Lingva Lexa. And Lingva Lexa, it is an NGO. It focuses on addressing propaganda-related offenses that escalate into serious international offenses. So basically, it works closely with law enforcement agencies to run effective investigations and build real criminal proceedings that meet international standards. And to moderate all this, we will have on stage Valentina Shapovalova, the analyst at Defense Innovation Highway, and she is an experienced person in coordinating the collaboration between Ukraine and Nordics, which is something we have already talked so much about in this event, and will talk even more, of course. And she develops and coordinates initiatives in cognitive warfare and defense. She holds a recently defended PhD degree from the University of Copenhagen, and there she specialized in the intersection of gender and Russian information warfare. Please welcome our next panel on stage, Rashid, Peter, Anna, and Valentina. Come over. Guys, panel?
We're waiting for one more person, yeah?
We are waiting for one more person.
That's very good timing on their part. Now they get a special round of applause.
Captive in this awkward silence. But while we wait for our last person, I will introduce the panel. We will be talking about the cognitive space. As all of us know who work with defense, who work with Russia's war against Ukraine, that wars are not only fought in one domain, they are fought in multiple, and the cognitive domain has been gaining attention and gaining more and more traction. Obviously, with Ukraine being the front runner within this space. And the panel today will focus on the non-state actors in the space of cognitive warfare and defense, non-state actors being NGOs, commercial actors, and we have 3 amazing speakers with us today. And I think let's just let's start with the questions, because we have so little time. These panels go so fast. I wanted to firstly ask all three of you to very briefly introduce yourself, just where you're coming from and why you're relevant to the space, and then give your thoughts on what are the advantages that the non-governmental actors have working in the space today in Ukraine.
From me, right?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Anya Vishnyakova. I'm an international criminal lawyer and investigator, and I'm the head of Ukrainian NGO Lingvalex. As you can understand from my accent, I'm from Ukraine originally. So being the head of an NGO, I can tell you that Ukraine is amazingly horizontal when it comes to the work, and law enforcement sector with which we are working definitely lacks resources to work with such massive quantity of crimes, and that's why we can cooperate with them and help them whatever we can.
Peter?
My name's Peter Pomerantsev. As you can tell from my surname, my roots are in Ukraine. I was born there, but I grew up in England. But I now work at Johns Hopkins University, where I research propaganda, both in theory, but also lots of applied research about how you counteract, especially Russian propaganda. And I've been working really in Ukraine since 2014. And look, we all talk about the need for an all-of-society response to disinformation, polarization, foreign malign campaigns. In Ukraine, that's a reality. Really, over the last 12 years, we've seen media that have transformed how they think about this challenge, exposing operations, but also thinking about how you engage audiences, which is only a process that media in the West are going through now. You have this incredible collaboration between OSINT investigators who track and anticipate foreign campaigns, working together with high-trust government bodies in order to counteract them. You have educational institutions working on this issue. It's emerged over 12 years, but it's a truly all-of-society response. And we talk about that a lot. We use that phrase. In Ukraine, it's a reality.
I'm Rashid. I'm the Strategic Partnerships Lead at Open Minds, a British-Ukrainian cognitive defense tech company where we're aiming to solve some of the hardest challenges in the space, from analysis to engaging audiences in hard-to-reach environments, to the question of what, where do non-governmental actors have the edge here. I believe it's from the standpoint of a company and of a private company, it's the speed of innovation. You can see it across in every industry, but especially as well as in the cognitive warfare domain, or call it information warfare domain, is the willingness and the speed to innovate, the speed to come up with new tech, the speed of having to actually think of new technology to be able to counter Russia's or adversarial information operations the same way as engaging audiences as well.
And the crime of aggression, that is quite big. I'm sure many people here heard also about this tribunal for Putin. So now we're building the case also for this tribunal. Why did we decide to make this research? And if anyone is interested, it's in the open, in the public space, so on the website of our organization. Because we needed the evidence of the impact between propaganda and the mobilization. The issue is that we as lawyers are extremely boring, and for us the threshold is very high, right? So we cannot just put in the criminal case, okay, yeah, you know, propaganda has an impact on mobilization, and that's why high-level people from Kremlin are making this machine work. We needed like very clear evidence. So what we did together with also the Prosecutor General and with the security services, we went to these camps where prisoners of war are kept, and we made a questionnaire where we clearly put 18 different most popular propaganda narratives. And of course, we didn't put it like, oh, do you believe that Ukrainians are Nazis? So we had like a scale from 1 to 10, where they could put like how much do they believe in something, and the results honestly were shocking and very upsetting, because the main question was like how objective they would could be, right? People are sitting in the captivity for more than 1 year, and even sitting in the captivity, even being POWs. The results are horrendous, especially what we were shocked about, dehumanization. You know this scale from monkey to a person, right? So like a very easy one that is on the internet everywhere. They will literally put that we are not people, right? That clearly showed the dehumanization narrative. And then we made these correlations. So for us, this research can be useful for the further criminal proceedings, right? Not against the so-called token heads or low levels, but the high levels who are programming this machine. In parallel, like I'm here also as a part of fellow for Alliance for Democracy, we, for example, are developing the startup that can analyze massive quantity of propaganda, having the statements with the criminal relevance. So altogether, we're trying like to merge and to put it like for the criminal proceeding against high-level perpetrators. Yeah, thank you.
That was very brief.
I tried to give more place to Rashid and Peter.
Yeah. And Peter, I mean, your work is so massive that I could just ask you a bazillion questions, but I think I want to focus on, I want to focus on how do actors, non-state actors in Ukraine move from just reactive actions against Russian influence operations to more proactive approach?
Well, there's two ways to think about a more proactive approach. There's a kind of thinking about it in terms of the sort of actions that you do, and there's the question of geography, where you're doing it. So if you're talking about actions, we do a lot of admiring the problem. We do a lot of that in the EU, sort of like analyzing how does Russian propaganda work, how they spread certain narratives. A more proactive approach would be to undermine the networks and systems that are doing it, not merely to expose it, but to anticipate where they're going with it. Yeah, trying to understand not just like a narrative that's emerging, but what is the network in Russian military intelligence who are launching a campaign to subvert an election. Understanding so much about them, yeah, their travel, their networks, their command structure, that we can start anticipating what they're going to do and start intervening through law enforcement, through other means much earlier. We managed that in Moldova. In Moldova, a bunch of research from journalists and from intelligence agencies showed way in advance of the election there that Russians were using proxies to launch a massive illegal vote buying campaign, that they were setting up sort of pseudo parties. We all knew this ahead of time because we understood who was running it. We understood the networks creating it, which meant that we could intervene journalistically and through law enforcement much earlier. So, and the work that Anya does is very important for that as well. Once you understand who's behind it, you can start disrupting it before it happens, not after. If you're doing it after, you've lost. Yeah? So that's number one. Number two is engaging audiences. So not just simply sort of saying the Russians are doing an influence campaign, but saying, here is the audience that they're trying to influence, whether that's in EU countries or neighborhood countries, and engaging those audiences preemptively. A lot of the sort of social science shows that you've got to do it preemptively. You've got to understand what the Russians want to do and reach out to those audiences before they've launched their campaign. So pre-bunking, engagement. That's a bit of a revolution in the minds of a lot of media and a lot of government networks as well. So that's in terms of more proactive approach in terms of activity. But then there's also the question of geography. Where are you doing this? Yeah? So at the moment, Putin is building, officially, according to his own commitments, an army of 1.5 million people. Yeah? That is obviously not just to threaten Ukraine, that is to threaten Europe. So I think we all have a prerogative to undermine the mobilization of 1.5 million fighting men. And in order to do that, it is unavoidable and necessary for you to start to engage with sections of the Russian population. Yeah? If we want to stop the creation of a 1.5 million army, a genocidal army, I use that word carefully as somebody who also works on war crimes. Certainly an army that indulges in dehumanizing and genocidal rhetoric on our borders, not far from Denmark's borders, then we have, I think, a duty to undermine that process. That means doing campaigns and engagement into Russia to disrupt that process. And again, you would apply the same methodology. You want to disrupt the systems doing it, their financing, their communications models, and you need to target the audiences who are being recruited. That's just one example of, I think, a very obvious priority of the necessary need to do cognitive campaigns into Russia if we're serious about peace. Are we?
And then you turn to Rashid.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Are we serious about peace?
Are we?
Yeah.
I think this is a conversation to be, we need to have, right?
It is.
We need to dedicate another time for it.
But it's actually, my question to you perfectly ties with what Peter has been talking about, in the sense that, I mean, you work a lot with analysis, but you also do a lot of proactive work in Open Minds. What has become more difficult in the past 4 years, working against Russian influence operations?
Great question. And I wish I had some of the people, and I think in the audience there's people who work with it, researchers, and at Open Minds we have the analysts team who actually do that sort of track down each and try to track down some of those operations targeted against us, Ukrainians or Europeans in general. But I think even if you go back 4 years back, right, and this is, again, the speed of how things change in every aspect, especially in this one and what we call cognitive warfare. For those who are Ukrainians in the audience, you probably remember some of those clumsy translations of Russia's information operations targeted against us. They couldn't really adapt to the specific context as much as they can do now. So there's a thing that changed is how much generative AI is able to adapt to the contextual understanding of each audience, both linguistically, culturally. They could create accounts easily with AI. Then it goes with create as many narratives as they want, messaging campaigns across different platforms. So I think for the analysts, the task has become a lot harder over the past 4 years, especially with the rise of with generative AI. So and I think we should mention that probable majority of those information operations are very difficult to attribute, or even impossible at this point. Majority of those are not. So we always, we know strategically perhaps who's doing that to us. We could only assume that this is done by Russia, but of course there's so many different layers how they run those operations. And when you catch them by hand, of course they're denying it. But yeah, I think with the platforms where they operate, where some of the perhaps in the West we're not willing to get into, whether it's on Telegram or TikTok, the operations there are very fragmented, and they run through different layers and actually getting picked up sometimes by credible media as well. Yeah, I think that would be the hardest right now over the past 4 years that's been happening now.
But Ukraine has been innovating insanely since the beginning of the full-scale war. And you already mentioned a few of the things that are happening specifically in Ukraine, but what are the lessons that the Danish context or the European context more broadly could learn from Ukraine, and which things are simply not transferable? What things could you not do if you're not in Ukraine? And this is a question to both of you.
Okay, I will say a couple of words.
Yeah.
Do not underestimate the threat.
Yeah.
I think that propaganda is perceived as something very blurred, right? Because, I mean, like, unfortunately, when the drone is killing a child, you can see the result immediately. Of the propaganda, you cannot. And that's the mistake that we did in Ukraine. And still, the conflict that started, the war that started in 2014, not in 2022, right? It had some presuppositions. And huge impact of Russian propaganda that was not stopped is one of them. And when we're working like with sanctions and when we're saying that, listen, Russian culture, Russian diplomacy, sport, education, these are all the methods through which Russian propaganda is sharing its narratives, right? Europeans are like, but this is freedom of speech, right? Where is culture? And where is propaganda? This is different. No, it's not. The person who was literally raised in Russian culture, being a Russian speaker, watching Russian movies, listening to Russian music, and etc., I'm quite legit to say this. And it's one thing when you're thinking that some piece of culture is definitely worth the attention, and etc. The other thing is how it's used. So that was the very big mistake of Ukraine, that we didn't stop this huge flow of propaganda prior to 2014. And these are the results that we are still observing. So, I mean, like freedom of speech and etc., it's one thing, but when you're working with this huge machine that starts working in Kremlin, this is the operational level that has to be viewed in a very different way.
Peter?
So, I mean, I've written 3 books. I'm writing a 4th about propaganda. And the reason I keep on coming back to the subject is because it really is a way of asking the critical questions about when are we free? When do we know our own minds? How are we susceptible to influence? And whether we like it or not, wars tend to be the crucibles where we have massive moments of new knowledge on this. So after the First World War, the knowledge from the First World War creates the field of public relations in many ways. And on the other hand, media literacy, that all starts after we understand the power of propaganda in World War I. This huge debate about what is the public sphere, what is the democratic public sphere. In World War II, it's more about understanding the kind of the unconscious, the role of what we would call psychographics, the psychological power of propaganda that comes out of World War II. And right now, where at the start it was going to be a very steep learning curve, Rashid mentioned, what is the power of AI? How do we use it ethically? How do we use it effectively yet ethically? How do we balance that? How do we understand its influence on our societies? We're at the edge of a technological revolution as big as the one caused by radio and in World War II and by newspapers and cinema around World War I. This is going to be the crucible where we learn. This is going to be the crucible where we understand effects. This is where we're going to understand what it means to be human. And out of that crucible will emerge a new understanding of the public sphere. Yeah, because we know that the old one doesn't work anymore. The idea that we had of how we would construct discourse in a democratic society has broken down. Denmark is one of the last places where it's just about functioning, but just looking at your neighbors, let alone America where I live, it's clearly over. So it's a paradox. In war, you really begin to understand what is influence, how do you affect behavioral change, how do you undermine and build resilient networks, and that knowledge will then create our understanding of what makes a democratic public sphere in the future. So it's very dangerous, but it's also very, very delicious.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that, what Peter has just mentioned, but I think the one point, and of course this is the context that Ukraine is in, the existential threat to its own independence, and that's where sort of treating the information environment or cognitive warfare, information warfare as the actual domain of war where you have to engage. We at Open Minds are proponents of more of proactive approach, actually. It's something that Peter was just answering the second question about it is of course there's a part about analysis, there's a part about attribution, there's a part about mapping some of those networks. This is very important, but how do we actually push back? How do we actually fight back? This is the question that we need to also solve inside of Europe. We already have this conversation, but we need to deepen the conversation, how we actually start doing it. In Ukraine, there's tons of different innovations happening now with AI, with different software and different platforms. We at Open Minds are developing those as well, both on the analysis side on the simulation of audiences side and also an actual proactive approach. And I think we understood, since we were founded, and perhaps some in the audience, especially the Ukrainian founders, were founded the wake of the invasion. We mapped this as we are at war. And I think in Europe, if Russians have been running and spending billions of dollars on their influence operations to influence your decision, to influence your governments, your elections, to sort of have you on their side, if I could put it that way, or create chaos in that regard in your own audiences, then what is, this is that you are at war. We are at that point where we perhaps do not need to engage in the same ways as Ukrainians do. Of course, some of the playbook is transferable, but we just need to start treating the environment as the actual battleground. That's pretty much it. This is what needs to be transferred here.
And this wraps up so beautifully, and also within the time frame. You're also concise. This is amazing. But it wraps up and ties into what I started by saying, that, again, the war consists of many different aspects, and it happens on many different domains. And I think also as a person who has been researching Russian propaganda and who is working within the space of cognitive warfare between the Nordics and Ukraine, there is still a lack of understanding in especially the more civilian sectors in Europe, that we are already at war with Russia. It is not a future scenario, it is a scenario today. And again, it goes back to exactly what you said, Rashid, that it is also about changing the culture and about changing the mindset of recognizing that we are already at war. Thank you so much to Anna, Peter, and Rashid. You have been amazing. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.